Sahana bhavatu, Sahano bhunaktu, Saha viryam karavavahai, Tejasvinavaditam astu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May we work together with great energy. May our study be illumined. May we not unnecessarily cavil with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. We are all present here because of one common factor. That is, we all have energy. You may have noticed sometimes you have more and sometimes you have less. And of course, when we think of energy, we normally think of physical energy, something that makes something move. And we seldom think, really, that thought itself is an energy, and yet it is. In fact, it's the most subtle energy that we have. So we have something in yoga which is designed specifically to control energy of any type, on the basis that there is only one energy. And the ancient Indian mind had this peculiarity. It decided that instead of researching every grain of sand, or every satellite, or every meteorite, or every star, or every galaxy, or in the language of modern science, maybe every black hole, if there are such things, or any of those kind of things, we don't have to do it. All we have to do is understand and then control the energy which is around us. The only thing that we can control is our own bodies and minds, and that's all. And when we resolve it with the help of modern science and with the help of the yogic insight, we come to only one conclusion. Instead of taking all the minutiae, whether it's energy, matter, or whatever it is, instead of examining every atom, what we do is make a generalization. And that tendency toward a generalization is also picked up by modern science, because modern science wants to know, is there a theory of everything? Is there one thing? Is there a fundamental source that we can go to? Now, the ancient Greeks and the ancient Indians had a concept of atom, and atom means the smallest thing you can ever think of, and everything else comes from that. But of course, we've discovered, no, there's something more than that. So, for example, when we talk about the hydrogen bomb splitting the atom, what will we find? We'll find radiation. So more fundamental than the atom is radiation. That was discovered. And radiation is a generalization. It's like a continuous oneness. And we'll find it therefore everywhere. And also, we'll find every other expression an expression of it, because radiation can be inversed into an atom. An atom, of course, goes to atomic structures and energies and molecules and finally tables and chairs and you and me. So what is that generalized energy from which everything comes? And what is that generalized sense of matter from which everything comes? The ancient yogis called that generalized matter akasha. It's difficult to translate. Sometimes it's translated as space, sometimes it's translated as potential matter. Both of these are correct, but these are just theoretical images. Because imagine something that has no time or no space, it's very difficult. Therefore, it's also called avyakta, unmanifest. Confusingly, its origin is also called unmanifest until we come to a source. So if we do it with every facet that we can think of, every field of energy that we can think of, let us say physical energy, it goes back to one thing, and this one thing is called prana. This is the name for it. And all matter is called akasha. And when prana acts on akasha, things start moving and happening. But when akasha remains just as it is, nothing happens. Now, of course, modern cosmology would want something like an origin, a big bang, and then it requires some ad hoc insert called inflation and so on. And so there's a linear progression, something like an evolution from start to finish. But the puzzle is, what is the source of that? And of course, that's an unknown, because all space and time begins at a single moment. And therefore, there's no question what is before. Before is a time question. You can say what is after. But you see, this linear model was not accepted by the ancient yogis. The ancient yogis would have accepted something that is cyclical, so that no doubt there's a manifestation coming out and going into less and less subtle areas until we come across the most gross areas that we have, the things that are visible to us. That's their form of evolution. But when you go back into an area of potentiality where at the end of this evolutionary cycle, it all goes back into its origin. And this origin is also called, confusingly, unmanifest, because it's not manifest yet. It's simply potential. All potentiality remains there. Now, the most fundamental study that we have really on this subject of prana will be contained in a kind of commentary to the basic text on the philosophy of yoga as a philosophy, which is derived from the sutras, the threads, the aphorisms of Patanjali, that goes back over 2,500 years or so, but probably way before that. And this commentary is known to us, of course, as the book called Raja Yoga by Swami Vivekananda in two sections. One section, the Patanjali Yoga Sutras with summaries of the ancient commentaries, and the other one, a general commentary, overall generalized explanation of things like what is concentration, what is prana, what is psychic prana, how do we control this, and so on, because psychic prana, otherwise called thought, is the most subtle of all the energies that we have. So I'm going to refer to this chapter, and perhaps to understand things a bit better, we can put things into a conversational form. So let us suppose that when prana speaks in regard to what is behind all the bodily functions, it might speak like this. It might say, a systematic analysis shows that things perceived are really indescribable. You see, we think we can describe everything, but if we investigate a little further and make a little further analysis, we'll find it's a straw man. We'll find that what looks like a body is really atomic structures. We don't see it in that way, because if we did, life would be difficult for us. So for passport purposes, we give an identity, I, and so on, a combination of a psychophysical thing which moves around and has a job to do, wakes up in the morning, a waking state, and so on, all of these things. But really, when we analyze it properly, this prana, if you were to ask it, what are you, who are you from the physical point of view, prana would say, I am indescribable. It's impossible to perceive me directly. Nobody perceives energy directly. We only perceive its effects. Therefore, if I was to speak on behalf of prana, I might say, therefore, I am also beyond the range of precise words and thoughts. We have a word called energy. We have a word called prana. But words have to have concepts. So we just have symbolic ideas of what this is. A skillful use of these tools, these words and concepts, of course, can help us to stay attuned to me, prana. Why should we stay tuned to raw physical energy? Because the final analysis says that that energy is not ours, and it's purely divine, because its source is also indescribable. Its source is also divine. Its source is the infinite invisible. Now, For worship purposes, religion calls this God. For philosophical purposes, we can call this the Absolute. So to a person in a waking state, which is what we're all in at the moment, hopefully, then I appear as your individual life force, if I was prana. And your judgments are normally based on the work of your organs and your limbs, and you have five senses. You bring messages through these five senses from the outer world. So the person who knows me as the power enabling him or her to hear, to touch, to see, to taste, to smell, all your organs of action are also five, and with their help, you speak, you grasp, you walk, you operate the two lower apertures. These are the five organs of reaction. We have 10 organs: information, reaction, and I am the one that operates this if I were prana speaking. Even your associate, your voluntary control over all these organs, and even that sense of voluntary control is because of my constant presence. Divine energy. All prana is divine. I know if you're a scientist, you'll register it to physical energy. But if you go further through the insight of spirituality, you'll see it is all divine energy. For this reason, we have alternative terms as well. The term Shakti indicates some kind of force. Even as I pronounce it, you can feel it, isn't it? Shakti, it has that sound to it. It is that immense force that spins the galaxies. That same force is the force that operates your lungs. And so control of the motion of the lungs is also called pranayama. It is one form of controlling this energy, because you see, we can take a lesson, as Swami Vivekananda himself says, from electricity. Electricity is simply electrons traveling in the same direction, forced to travel in a particular direction. All around you is this force in the electromagnetic field called energy. All around you are X-rays and gamma rays and infrared and ultraviolet, and all of these various rates of vibration are there. You only pick up a few because your instruments are selected only to pick up a few things. But all of this is prana. And so, as you reflect more and more, you will find that other activities are also derived from me, prana. For example, you may feel that I am behind the digestive fire. Now, this is also mentioned, of course, in the Bhagavad Gita. I digest your food, the 4 kinds of food I digest. And you might connect me with the formation of your blood and the molding of every cell. And you might see me as the principle presiding over all the organic and bodily functions. You realize that as I'm speaking, a kind of meditation is being formed. When we register all of these things to this divine energy, it becomes a meditation. And an echo of that was the meditation that we did earlier on. And sustained reflection on this makes a person's vision penetrate deeper and deeper, because you already understand the scientific view that the atom is, in fact, a whirlpool of energy. And the yogis understood that, and the scientists are catching up with it. Because at the rock bottom, all of this atomic structure and subatomic structure are actually described as virtual particles. Virtual. They're not really there. They appear and they disappear miraculously, seemingly from nowhere, and appear from somewhere again. You are under the illusion that you are a solid entity. And yet, as I have told you in other classes, if you remove the space from 8 billion people on the planet, it will all fit into a small size of a small apple. That's all we are. And when you investigate what is the whole universe, we find it is so dilute, it is virtually empty. Our illusion is it is full. And so we can gradually become aware that even our digestive process itself is basically a complex vortex of different kinds of energies, all derived from one thing. And it's these that take the forms of saliva, bile to digest the food, other digestive juices. In the stomach, hydrochloric acid is there, and the necessary enzymes to break food down. The powerful liquids break the food down that are eaten, and we extract the nutrients. We say we digest our food, not at all. It is this prana that does it for us, this divine energy. And other energies, of course, silently build up the entire body. They promptly replace what is lost when the cells yield up their energy, as wood does when we set on fire. Now, Swami Vivekananda has some remarkable things to say. He says that when there was neither ought nor not, he's quoting from the Vedas there, a very famous passage there, when there was neither ought nor not, when darkness covered darkness. What a beautiful expression. You can imagine darkness, pitch black, no moon, clouds covering everything. You go outside, a new moon we can't see, and it's pitch black. Add darkness on the top. When darkness was covering darkness, what existed then? That akasha, that generalized matter, existed without motion. The physical motion of the prana was stopped, but it existed all the same. And at the end of a cycle, the energies now displayed in the universe quiet down and become potential. And at the beginning of the next cycle, they start up, they strike upon the akasha, and out of this akasha evolve other forms, various forms, and in the akasha changes this prana, changes also into all these manifestations of energy. The knowledge and control of this prana is really what is meant by pranayama. Even at the beginning of this chapter on prana, Swami Vivekananda says, pranayama is not, as many think, something about breath. Breath indeed has very little to do with it, if anything. Breathing is only one of the many exercises through which we get to the real pranayama. And so pranayama means the control of prana, energy. And if energy is only one, once you've controlled the prana here, you'll have controlled the entire prana in the whole universe. And so he says, this opens to us the door to almost unlimited power. Suppose, for instance, a man understood the prana perfectly and could control it. What power on earth would not be his? He would be able to move the sun and the stars out of their places, to control everything in the universe, from the atoms to the biggest suns, because he would control the prana. This is the end and aim of pranayama. When the yogi becomes perfect, there will be nothing in nature not under his control. And if he orders the very gods, the deities, or the souls of the departed to come, they will come at his bidding. All the forces of nature will obey him as slaves. And when the ignorant see these powers of the yogi, they call them the miracles. One peculiarity of the Hindu mind is that it always inquires for the last possible generalization. It goes on like that. Then, of course, how to control this prana? You see, behind all particular ideas stands this generalized, he says, an abstract principle. Grasp it, and you'll grasp everything. There's that famous passage from the Upanishads Mundaka Upanishads, Kasmin no Bhagavan Vijnate. What is that? By knowing which, we can know everything. Go to the highest generalization. That means in our daily life, it is a useful thing because it changes all our so-called difficulties. It removes them. As soon as you see the individuality away from this generalization, you have a difficulty. Fear only arises when we register. There are two things. Physical prana is one. But then psychic prana, the most subtle form of a thought, is only one. And it can be traced back to one cosmic mind. And that can be traced back to a potentiality, and that can be traced back to a source. So in every area, be it physical, be it mental, and be it spiritual, it all goes back to one source. Only one energy, only one cosmic mind, and only one source. That source, technically, we call Brahman. In yogic language, we call it Purusha also. And so he says, this body is very near to us, nearer than anything in the external universe, and the mind is the nearest of all. The prana, which is working this mind and body, is the nearest to us of all, the prana in the universe. This little wave of the energy or prana, which represents our own energies, mental and physical, is the nearest to us of all the waves of the infinite ocean of prana. And if we can succeed in controlling that little wave, then alone we can hope to control the whole of prana. So every manifestation of this power that we see is all with the idea of controlling this prana. He mentions, and I'll update it for modern readers, you see, that there are mind healers. So we call this psychotherapists and so on. People are involved in psychological counseling and so on and so forth. Then there are faith healers, no doubt. You find particularly in Christianity, in more or less every religious sect, you'll find faith healers. You'll find spiritualists trying to contact other beings. You'll find hypnotists and so on and so forth. He mentions all of these things. And if we examine these different bodies, we shall find at the back of each this is what they're doing. And in more modern times, in alternative therapies, we have this Reiki. And what Reiki, never mind about the controversial aspects of what it may be, but still it's this acknowledgement that by viewing everything as a sea of energy, divine energy, no doubt, we can take it one step further and say divine energy. By doing that, what are we doing? We are mobilizing, we're tuning in, as it were, to this divine grace, this universal energy. So we can take all these various theories down, and the residuum would be that it's the one and the same force that they are manipulating. And they're doing it unknowingly, largely. They've stumbled on the discovery of a force. Now, don't forget, in Swami Vivekananda's day, we didn't have there was no term called energy necessarily. And so all of the terms were called force. And force is also quite telling as a word because it means the thing that moves something else. So the prana is the vital force in every being. Thought is the finest and highest action of all prana, and thought, again, as we see it, is not all. Now, if you're able to mobilize, to mobilize this prana called thought, will it not spontaneously have its manifestation in the physical world? Of course it will. This is the secret, if you will, of spiritual healing. And there's also what we call instinct or unconscious thought. You know, if a mosquito lands on your nose, your hand immediately goes. And this is what we call instinctive action. This kind of prana is involved in reflex actions. But then there is another level, a small area called conscious thought. There's also prana, And by this we reason, we judge, we think, and we see the pros and cons of certain things. And that's not all. We know that reason is limited. Reason can only go to a certain extent. And beyond that, we can't reach. The circle within which it runs is very limited indeed, yet at the same time, we find facts rush into the circle like the coming of comets. And so it's certain they come from outside the limit, it seems like that, although our reason cannot go beyond. And the causes of this phenomenon intruding themselves in this small limit are outside of this limit. The mind can exist on a still higher plane, superconscious. And that's how we divide the expression of consciousness itself into the lower kind, which we call the unconscious mind, and then the conscious mind, and we can exert our authority over that. And we cannot control the unconscious area until we control the conscious mind, because what we call the unconscious originally started off as conscious activity. If you want to find out how behavior is, because there was a learning curve and there was an experience which went ultimately into biological memory and came out as behavior. All of this is due to this particular energy. And there's still a higher state, the superconscious state, which we call samadhi. Perfect concentration. How do we get this? We get this by consciously taking this energy and moving it in a certain direction. This is what is meant in yogic terminology by concentration, ultimately the highest concentration, where only one thought is there in the mind, that is meditation, and that yields into the perfect superconscious state, which we call samadhi. Even in the universe of thought, we find unity. But at last, when we get into the self, the divine self, we know that that self can only be one, beyond vibrations of matter in its gross and subtle aspects. So the physical unity is called akasha. The mental energy unity, the mind unity is called cosmic mind. These are my words. And the spiritual unity is simply called Brahman. The modern physics, in his time, Swami Vivekananda was mentioning, also has demonstrated that the sum total of the energies of the universe is the same throughout. Now, the most famous equation, I suppose, in physics, which we all know, is this E equals mc squared. And this is exactly pre this declaration in the appendix on special relativity that Einstein wrote out. But here he's declaring it. He says that in modern physics has also demonstrated that the sum total of the energies in the universe is the same throughout. It has also been proved that the sum total of energy exists in two forms: potential, toned down, and calmed. And then next it comes out manifested as all these various forms. Of course, the most obvious manifestation of this prana in the human body is the motion of the lungs. And that is why pranayama is associated with the movement of the lungs, because it has a direct effect on that prana, which we call the nervous system. And that nervous system ultimately comes out as the mechanism for the mind, called the brain. And so it is by directing all of this. But you'll find we don't have to go through this breathing necessarily, because love of God suspends the breath into a state of kumbhaka. There are many ways of doing this. When a person is meditating, is also concentrating this prana, says Swami Vivekananda. So the feeling becomes more and more subtle as we become more and more tuned. In an ocean, there are huge waves, he goes on to say, like mountains, then smaller waves, and still smaller down to little bubbles. But back of all these is the infinite ocean. The bubble is connected with the infinite ocean at one end, and the huge wave at the other. So one may be a gigantic man, another little bubble, but each is connected with an infinite ocean of energy, which is the common birthright of every animal that exists. He goes on to say, wherever there is life, the storehouse of infinite energy is behind it, starting as some fungus, some very minute microscopic bubble, and all the time drawing from that infinite storehouse of energy. A form is changed slowly and steadily until, in course of time, it becomes a plant, then an animal, then man, and then ultimately God. What a beautiful statement. What a beautiful presentation. And he says this is attained through millions of eons, but what is time? An increase of speed, an increase of struggle is able to bridge the gulf of time. And that is why we involve ourselves in spiritual life and spirituality. It is a way of concentrating all our energies in one direction. So everything is this manifestation. This is this chapter on prana. And he goes on, and then he goes on to the next chapter mentioning psychic prana itself. So continue our conversation with prana. Supposing from behind mental movements, we ask, who are you? Well, the body itself is moved by thought. Even such simple acts like opening the door or sweeping the floor are preceded by thought, you must have noticed. Human progress in any field has been achieved by careful planning, securing the cooperation of others, eliminating faulty thinking, and all our difficulties in life are due to this faulty thinking. When somebody has a problem, what will we say? We will say, please change your thinking. But if you don't understand it, it sits there in the theoretical realm. You don't really know what it means. It means take this energy called thought and direct it in a higher way. Higher way means away from this self-identity, away from the individuality to the generalized version of it, generalized version of everything. And the highest is the spiritual realm, spiritual ideas, noble ideas, the prayers. The noble thoughts come to me from all sides. So, uncontrolled emotions, you will recognize, if you look at it properly, lead to pain and even disaster. Don't ask, why do we have pain? Well, we can eliminate pain, and you may be suffering and say, how is that possible? You see, pain means our attention is attached to the area of pain. Theoretically, we can shift it. Controlled emotions clear the way to success and joy. And any watchful person knows that emotions like anger, uncontrolled things, they rise up as waves. We can see it start, we can see it have its life, its peak, and we can see it on its demise. And the key thing is, I'm not that. When I identify with it, I have pain and problems. And all mental movements, therefore, are waves of a higher order than just physical ones. Physical ones like those of muscles, nerves, and so on. But you see, the spiritual aspirant, the seeker of wisdom, quickly finds me, if I was prana, abiding as an invisible ocean behind all the waves. Now, always I go through this process, 24 categories, tattvas, because this is the way to shift our understanding, to shift our way of thinking. This that we experience now are just the crystallized form of waves. And we went through this in the meditation earlier. And these waves come to us in succeeding levels of subtlety. And the most subtle is the furthest away, as it were. So we can take a number of steps. We can visualize it like a ladder. We start off on the lowest rung, understanding that there's a next rung. We don't leave it there. Next rung, and there's next one, and the next one, until finally we come to the source, which is a unity. That is the process called meditation. Can we use it without sitting? Yes. Meditation with eyes open. As soon as we register something in front of us, let us take, for example, seeing a person in front of us with a non-judgmental eye. And then understanding that what we call the body that sits in front is really made from atomic whirlpools of waves combined. Not just any waves like an ocean, like a physical ocean, but these are all divine waves, since there's only one source, that is the divine. We can see this as waves, solid waves. We can trace it all the way back to Akasha, that is generalized matter. And when a person moves by talking or with the eyes open or as movement of the head, we can register all that back to the generalized energy. And these two companions, Prana and Akasha, working on each other, is what we're observing. We're observing a divine play of energetic forces. And where is that coming from? It's coming from a supreme cosmic mind, a supreme thinker, what we call God, personalized God. And that goes back. We can stop there even and worship that and do that with everything that we are seeing. Then who gets affected by what? And who's affecting what? By shifting our thinking, then this divine energy is flowing through, seeing it in its true form, recognizing its divinity everywhere. That divinity flows through. And then that transformation takes place, and we say, spiritual healing has taken place, or a transformation has taken place, or a miracle has taken place. There's nothing unusual. It is also all nature's forces being manipulated into the world that we see. And this, of course, is called the Kalpataru tree, the wish-fulfilling tree. And of course, there's this great analogy that we have, and we celebrate our own version of it on the 1st of January normally. So what does it mean? It comes out as a story. You must have noticed what the story is. So I suppose all stories have to begin once upon a time. So there was a man who's traveling, very tired, and he notices a tree with shade and he sits under it. He doesn't know it's a wish-fulfilling tree. That means every thought he has will be fulfilled while under this tree representing the infinite, invisible cosmic mind. Then, of course, he's thinking, I'm so tired, you see, and also I'm hungry. And then he starts imagining all the beautiful things that he has to eat, all the delicacies and so on. Immediately, before him is a cloth, and all the fanciful goods are there for eating, and he consumes this. Now, as I'm talking this, I register, I'm repeating this story from a broadcast I gave while I was away. And some of the people might have heard that broadcast. So I'm changing the story a little bit just to make it more entertaining. So he fills his stomach with all these beautiful things, and then, of course, naturally he feels a little sleepy, plus the tiredness of travel. And he thinks it would be wonderful if there was a luxurious bed here, and the bed appears, he lies down. Wouldn't it be nice if there was some person who was lovingly massaging my feet? That person appears. All of a sudden, he starts questioning, because he's satisfied his physical needs, he satisfies his hunger, he satisfied his thirst, and he satisfied his need to relax. Now he has leisure to think. And he thinks, this is incredible. I didn't even stop to understand how all this appeared. And how fortunate am I? And I hope a tiger doesn't come and spoil it all. And of course, that's exactly what happens. So we have to be sure that the conscious movement that we call thought is properly controlled. This form of pranayama is properly controlled. Because the seeker of wisdom will quickly find me, if I was Prana speaking, abiding as an invisible ocean behind all the waves and moving as the thought moves it. And the person who is doing this is sure to is on the spiritual path, who has this shift in thinking, is sure to start from me, prana. Because if I was prana, I would say I sustain them and they finally fall back on me. So mental energy penetrates and controls all the physical. And from this point of view, if I was to say, who are you? I would say, I am psychic prana. And then some important questions will arise. Because one thing might come, where does this prana come from? Where is all this energy coming from? How does he come into the body? And how does he dwell, seemingly dividing himself? And how does he depart? Now, these are not my questions. These come from the Prishna Upanishad, because exactly these questions are asked. And so, the highest truth is the Supreme Self, without a second. That is the highest generalization we can come to. It's immutable, it doesn't change, it remains constant. Because change is a function of time. And it doesn't come in, it doesn't go out. So the answer to the questions shouldn't neglect any of these aspects. Where does it come from? Same thing with our modern analysis of the universe. Where does it come from? We have to be sure not to register something in time or space, something that changes. They should not also, any inquiry, go outside the framework of their inquiries. And so the teacher can use familiar illustrations. And the teacher says he, in effect, imagine a person possessed of hands and so on, standing in the light. When this as a cause, there arises a result in the form of a shadow. And in the same way, says a teacher, using an illustration from the Prishna Upanishad, the Supreme Person as a cause, the result appears as prana, as energy, like his shadow. And we are reminded also of Plato's cave example. People sitting in a cave, seeing there's a light behind, they don't see it because behind them, all they see is shadows on the cave wall. I think I put out a poem like that some days ago, Shadows on a Wall. And they're fascinated by these shadows, our shadow world. But you see, one person inquiring what is the cause of these shadows will see there's a light, and they will be attracted toward a light, and then they'll go outside the cave and see the glory of the full daylight. But when he calls the others, come, see this, they don't want to do it. They say, no, we don't. We're not comfortable leaving our world, our shadow world. We remain here, enslaved, no doubt. And then, of course, the discriminating, the discerning student will also learn from any statement that he should devote himself or herself exclusively to realize the Supreme. I shouldn't entertain any goal apart from it. And if a person does this, they are truly yogis. So then if prana was to speak, it would say, I divide myself in 5 ways. We might say that we have prana that operates the upper part of the body, prana that operates downwards, the 5 apparent divisions. And so we can register all of these things in the body, but we understand it is only one energy seemingly being dispersed in this way, just like light is dispersed in 7 different ways, and we call it a rainbow. And in the waking state, we can see many of these entities, many forms, many people, many places, many events. Some are sentient, and some are insentient. What's the difference? If you have a spider's web, clearly the spider is sentient. When you poke the web, the spider moves. The web just bounces, that's all. But it all comes from one cosmic consciousness. It makes them appear and penetrates all of these things equally. And to the discriminating student, then each dream will reveal the truth, and the reflection of the dream events from the waking state, you can easily detect it. You can see everything experienced in the dream, felt intensely real at the time, was really cosmic consciousness. And when we go into this dreamless state, then we see that it is this potentiality that has a potential for creativity. This we can use also in meditation, because this potential for creativity is technically called, in yogic terminology, yoga nidra, a kind of sleep which is still registering awareness, alertness. The main prana, life force, in a conversation that is contained in the Upanishads, we say, don't cherish the vanity from want of discrimination. It'll say, Prana will say, I alone sustain the aggregate of the body and senses through this fivefold distribution. And I do this by dividing myself in this way, inhaling and exhaling. Don't think you're breathing. Prana itself is doing it. And so the main prana, if it rises out of the body, as the Upanishads describe, then you're left hopeless, because all the other senses will have to go with it. Now, that is why we unfortunately associate this prana with breath, because the evidence that you're alive is, of course, this breathing mechanism. And so for that reason, it's unfortunately mistranslated as breath instead of life force. There is two other texts from the Upanishads, one from the Chandogya, one from the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, and they have slightly different versions of the same story, that the deities ask the creator in the story to tell them who among them is the greatest. Don't forget, the deities means illuminating factors. It means your internal sense organs. So who is the greatest? They're asking their creator. On whose departure the body becomes more wretched. And then speech and the rest they leave in turns. But after 1 year they return to find, in the absence of each, the rest remain intact. The body knows how to manage without these, working well. But when the main life force, when the main prana was about to leave, the others were all uprooted. It's like the queen bee. As easily as a well-bred horse pulls out his tether pegs, says the Upanishad. Then they all say, oh, sir, please do not depart. Now, of course, we register when it departs physically and merges into the rest of the prana, universal energy. We register this, of course, as human death. And so the sense of I, or egoism, itself has a continuity of its own. Throughout the day, our activities change, bathing, cooking, eating, sleeping, and so on and so forth. And the sense of I attaches itself to each one for a time. So as a result, each stage we affirm, I bathe, I do this, I eat, I that. But you see, actually, it's all to do with prana. It is prana itself that is doing it, not ourselves. And so far as we have been looking at this sense of I and ownership, the intellect are working with our daily activities and so on and so forth, all of these things. And we know that the mind and the ego disappear in what the waking man calls deep sleep. In deep sleep, none of this ego remains, and there's only this prana that operates as potentiality. That's all. So what we call this prana leaving, what we commonly call death, is really happens every night for all of us. A very dear friend of mine is preparing for this exit. I probably see him tomorrow afternoon. And with this philosophy, he's quite happy to depart, arranging everything nicely. And so it is this philosophy, really, that stops the fear of death, because all individuality is gone. In a deep sleep, there is no registration of any sense of individuality. There is only one unity without a second. And the more we come to this subtle understanding of one unity without a second, the more we are removed from the effects of the objective world on us that we summarize as pain or difficulties or obstacles, with a few moments of highlights. Now that sounds very pessimistic, but it's also truthful. We are strategizing our whole life in order to avoid some kind of physical and mental pain. And many people are suffering today physically, no doubt. Everybody will, everybody has. But on the psychological level, everybody more or less is suffering. Why? Because of this association of this individuality, which has no permanence. It disappears every night and disappears permanently for that person who has understood this source of unity from which all energy comes. So we've had a nice conversation with prana, with energy, and that helps us in a practical way, as all mental movements help us when we resolve everything systematically and progressively to unity, starting from what we find in front of us, going back to a combination of divine wave systems, divine graces. Then a new expression came to me fairly recently, because in travels I was helped a lot. And so actually, what are all of these subtle elements, these expressions of prana, akasha? They're really what we call angels. They're divine beings. We are all divine beings before being born, waiting in a lift, as it were, to perform some function and going back afterwards. That's all. To a child, you might say, life is a journey and we are the traveler. We come from God and we go to God. Viewed it this way, we'll find angels everywhere. Angels, helpful beings, helpful things, because all of these subtle waves are helpful to us. They're for us, they're not against us. They're part and parcel of Mother Nature's grace. So we leave it there. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.
Thank you, Swami.
Thank you.
Thank you, Swami.
Thank you. Thank you, Swami.